Okay, welcome everyone. I hope you can hear me all. Welcome to this kind of, joint event, but it's actually one event connected, where we have a talk in relation to the launch of the Palestine Land Studies Center at AUB in Beirut, and a lecture by Professor Salman Abu Sitta about the 11-year wars against Palestinians. I'm Dina Matar. I'm the chair of the Center for Palestine Studies. I will introduce the speakers shortly. The way that this works is we are letting people in still, and we have at the bottom of your screen you will find a question and answer icon, which you could put your questions in, and then I will pose them to the speakers tonight. Also, welcome to those people attending via Facebook. We also, if you could post your questions in the chat box so we can collect them. And just before we start, sometimes we might have a lot of questions, so we might not be able to go through every question. So I do apologize before I start. This series of lectures, book launches, and talks are sponsored by the SOAS Middle East Society, of which the Center for Palestine Studies is one of the key centers. And we hold them every Tuesday during term time. And we thank the SMEI for hosting this, and for Aki El-Bursi for being the master of the ceremonies. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Howayda Al-Harithy, who is going to talk to us about the Land Studies Center, the first one in relation to Palestine at AUB. It's a very great, achievement. And the achievement could not have happened without Dr. Salman Abu Sitta, a relentless scholar, academic, actor, activist, and supporter of Palestinian human rights and Palestinian rights. He has been a role model, if I can use that, for many people, including myself, in his achievements and in his persistence to try and engage the world, if not the scholarly community, with what happens to Palestine and to Palestinians. He is the founder and president of the Palestine Land Society, and he has written so many interesting books, including the author of the Comparative Atlas of Palestine, which I think he told me today it has been translated into Italian, correct?
The memoirs. Nothing by return.
Yeah, and he has done an atlas of the return journey. But one of his most kind of really fascinating books, apart from all his documentation and data supported material that he has shared with the world and with us, he has written this fantastic memoir, which is Mapping My Return, which has been translated into most recently Italian and other languages. Without further ado, I welcome both of you. Dr. Al-Harithy is talking to us from Lebanon, and Professor Abu Sitta is talking to us from Kuwait. So it's a really transnational kind of event, reflecting the Palestinian diaspora, exile, whatever we could talk about. So without further ado, Howayda, may I give you the platform to start, and then Professor Abu Sitta.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dina, for the introduction. Thank you for hosting us. It's really a serious pleasure for me to be here, especially to be here on behalf of AUB and briefly introducing the newly established Palestine Land Studies Center at AUB as its founding director. This is a very, very joyous occasion for me. I'll be very brief, and I'll tell you a little bit about the vision and the mission of the center. The Palestine Land Studies Center, which we call PLSC at the American University of Beirut, was established back in September of 2019 as part of the institution's ongoing commitment to the preservation, reclamation, and dissemination of Palestinian history. So it was a really historic landmark for EUB to engage in one of the most central issues of the issue. The PLSC will create a permanent home for an extensive archives donated by Dr. Salman Abu Sitta and the Palestinian Land Society in London. It will activate the archives through research and academic practices and will make them available for both the public, interacting with them from within and outside of AUB, and particularly scholars. So the center's primary aims really include the documentation, preservation of Palestinian history, memory, and social publications, and the organization of innovative teaching. This is also all besides the creation of a far-reaching network, hopefully, of scholars, academics, and professionals dedicated for the Palestinian cause. So we wanted to work across disciplines and geographies. The PLSC aims to really attract researchers from around the globe who are interested in scholarship surrounding territory, people, and social histories of Palestine. It will, in turn, provide access for maps, documents, data sets, and objects that are unique and unpublished in some instances on a regional scale. It will create a hub of sorts for pioneering, forward-looking, result-oriented research, methodology, and pedagogy, and will certainly try and thrive to serve to expand the scope of its impact across the globe by networking with institutions of similar interest and caliber, such as yourself. So we're here partly today to build that network as well. To give you a quick and brief idea of the collection itself that was donated by Dr. Abu Sitta, and where we are in the process of transferring incrementally, both digitally and tangibly. The archives are really composed of around 7,000 books, over 300 maps, around 450,000 registration deeds. Archives contain extremely, therefore, material, important maps, special items such as bridge mandate survey maps, valuable contribution for AUB's archive. Importantly, its research agenda. We take serious pride in being a liberal arts college whose research is leading in the region and globally, and this is certain to give us a further edge that marks our research that is meaningful to our region and impact-oriented. So I hope we succeed in doing that with all your help. I hope you stay connected, you keep. Thank you so much. I turn the floor over to Dr. Abu Sitta.
Dr. Salman, if you want to start.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Dina Matar, for your kind words and for inviting me here. And thanks also to our friend, Dr. Gilbert Ashkar, who has joined us now, I'm glad to say. I'm not a stranger to SOAS. I have many friends, past and present, and I attended and participated in many functions. And SOAS is a friendly, warm, civilized, and thought-provoking home. So it's good to come here again, even though it is virtually. I think back on our case in Palestine, and it often comes to my mind how I am ashamed of future generations who will read our history in the 20th and 21st century and wonder how we in this age could live with so much injustice, so many war crimes carried out for so long without remorse or remedy, with so much deception, so many falsehoods, so many lies. Such lies could have been verified by bringing up easily found facts, if and only if these facts were allowed to be known. My country, Palestine, has been stricken by two devastating attacks in the last 1,000 years, appropriately described as barbarian for what they have done. Both came from Central, Western Asia and Eastern Europe. Both caused unbelievable death and destruction. Both got help from Western powers hostile to us. One was defeated soundly, the other not yet. The first was the Mongol attack led by Hulagu Khan. In 1258, they reduced Baghdad to rubble. They destroyed its houses, palaces, and mosques. They killed 200,000, possibly more. They destroyed valuable manuscripts in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad and threw them in the Tigris River. Its water became black with ink. They plundered and looted everything in sight. They forged alliance against us with Frankish European crusaders. And they were finally defeated at Ain Jalut in Palestine on the 3rd of September, 1860. The second is the Hagana attack led by Ben-Gurion in March 1948. They came roughly from the same area, Al-Khazar, north of Black Sea and Eastern Europe. They destroyed over 500 towns and villages, including 150,000 houses. They plundered and looted houses, businesses, banks, and public properties. They committed 156 massacres and atrocities, killed tens of thousands, and made millions homeless, refugees until today. They did not destroy documents, but looted them and used them to seize land, properties, banks, schools, hospitals, railways, airports, and seaports. They forged a solid alliance with Western powers, particularly UK and USA. They are not defeated yet, but I'm sure they will be sometime in Palestine. It's still with us. It is waging many kinds of wars against us. Not many attacks. These attacks are daily by land, sea, and air. I'm talking about different kinds of wars. The first kind of war against us is military, to conquer and seize the land. It is a war we all know about in name, but not about its extent and purpose. It is a war in which the Hagana forces, composed of 120,000 soldiers, mostly trained in Second World War, organized in 9 brigades, entered a land they have not seen before, carried out 31 military operations in the space of 8 months. And in this period, 560 Palestinian cities and villages were attacked and emptied of its people, making refugees of 2/3 of the Palestinian people. Today, there are 7 million refugees, but half of them were expelled before there was something called Israel, before the British left Palestine, and before any Arab regular soldier entered Palestine. This is the enduring Nakba. The second war which followed is silencing the voice of the victims, denying they ever existed. In 1948, about 6 major massacres took place. None was reported by the 5 Western news agencies at the time, except perhaps Deir Yassin, and then only lightly. Reports about the most horrendous massacre of Al-Dawaima in October 1948, in which up to 500 people were savagely killed, was called, I quote, a figment of Oriental imagination. By whom? By the Israeli UN representative, Walter Eitan. We have another Israeli settler, Tzipi Hotovli, recently installed as Israel's ambassador in the United Kingdom. She called al-Nakba an Arab lie. Mention of al-Nakba is outlawed in Israel. But it took 4 decades for some courageous historians like Ilan Pape to expose the truth. This truth is still denied in many US universities at the pain of cutting off its funds. Now we come to the third war, third kind of war. It's geographical. Our Atlas of Palestine, 1917 to 1966, lists 55,000 names carved by the people about their life and places. The Israeli maps eliminated all of them and replaced them with 6,800 names, almost 1/10 of the original. And these were created by a committee. So if you look at Israeli maps today, Palestine does not exist. The fourth kind of war is historical. The historical record of Palestine in the last 2,000 years is obliterated and made blank in the Israeli textbooks, in the Zionist-controlled media, and removed from controlled websites elsewhere. It is replaced by a history of settler Jews who arrived in Palestine after the First World War. 2,000 years of Palestine's history, for which historical edifices are still abound, are totally deleted from record. But not only our history is erased, but our living traditions of dress, food, and songs are expropriated and claimed to be that of the invader. The fifth kind of war is archaeological. The destruction of about 500 Palestinian villages in 1948 and 49 was carried out by bulldozers of the Jewish National Fund and Public Works. But there is another anomaly. A strange team accompanied the destruction team. What is this team? It is an Israeli archaeological team which supervised the demolition and ordered the destruction of any building or structures until it was found useful for claims of Jewish history. Their work destroyed Roman, Byzantine, Arab, and Islamic monuments and structures in these villages. Now, those kinds of wars, as you can see, are converting evil into a virtue. I'm borrowing this idea from a forthcoming book by Sari Maqdisi, How to Convert Evil into a Virtue. Let us imagine this for a moment. How did the Palestinian landscape look like after the destruction of hundreds of villages? Maybe you can see a pile of stones where a house once stood. Maybe you can see a lone standing wall of a mosque. Maybe you can see a cracked bell tower of a church or a marble piece of a grave. This evil scene must be hidden, and it was covered with trees, woods, forests planted by non-indigenous trees. The cover-up was hailed as a campaign of making the desert bloom. Hardly any leader in the Western world or a city thereof in which Jewish communities had influence was not immortalized by a park name or a tree. And who's doing that? It was, and it is, the Jewish National Fund, JNF, which directed the Hagana operations in 1948 to attack villages. JNF seized the land of 372 villages. And the people now live in refugee camps. And JNF is registered in 41 countries as a tax-free charity. What for? For the improvement of the environment. I imagine George Orwell would fail to beat that. The sixth kind of war is political. Next to the military war, this is the most effective. The US and many Western countries vote against UN resolutions condemning Israeli crimes and violation of international law. They thwart any legal action against Israel. The actions of the departing Trump is a supreme example of trampling upon international law. Well, very likely there will be more little Trumps in the West. But we have a pleasant surprise. On Friday, February 5th, the ICC, the National Court of Criminal Court, admitted the obvious. Israel is liable to be tried for its war crimes. Well, let us hope it will not be aborted. The seventh kind of war waged against us is religious. God is recruited to win this war. Zionism claim that Zionists claim that they have the right to return after a 2,000 years absence. Where to? To the God-given land, to recover their property and expel the natives. The evangelists, Trump's main supporters, and they are the former restorationists of the 19th century, are recruited to support Zionism with great effect in the United States. The eighth war against us is defamation. Palestinian fighters and supporters are called terrorists. Edward Said is called a professor of terror. Anyone who explains the facts about Palestine, even among respected scholars or even UN officials, is called an anti-Semite. As you will know, the Zionist-inspired IHRA document is pushed for adoption by UK universities with limited success. It's an open season for defamation of Palestinians. The ninth war against us, kind of war against us, is lawfare. Domestic law in some Western countries criminalizes support for the grassroots campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS. And hence, any attempt to criticize Israel war crimes and apartheid will be criminalized. As you may have heard, there is a witch hunt in Germany against any mention of Israeli crimes against Palestinians. And there is a twist to that. The people who are criticized witch hunt, subject of witch hunt, are sometimes Jews, like Nerate Sommerfeld, who simply dare to speak about Palestinian situation. The 10th war is economic. Jewish financial power in the United States supporting AIPAC activity is a potent force. Trump, as you know, cut UNRWA funds. Israel strangles the economic conditions in the West Bank and converts people into economic hostages. The Israeli-imposed blockade of Gaza for 15 years is now making life unlivable, according to the United Nations. The aim, of course, is for people to demand bread to live instead of the right to live free. The 11th war against us is the most sinister of all. It may be called attritional genocide. As you know, Convention of Genocide includes a clause which says it includes a coordinated plan aimed at the destruction of the essential foundations of the life of nation groups. In 2018 and 19, during the Great Return March in Gaza, Israel injured 35,600 protesters. Of those, 6,650 were hit deliberately by Israeli snipers, shattering their knees. Today, you can hardly find a street in Gaza without the sight of a youth with an amputated leg. The attacks by poisonous gas in Gaza and the West Bank led to deformity in the newborn, with increased incidence of Down syndromes. Now, as you read in the news, Israel is denying vaccine to reach Palestinians in the occupied territories. Well, that's not even to speak of demolished homes and uprooting trees. These sinister acts lead to the disability of a whole generation, imposing a huge burden on their families and on the economy. The outcome is a shattered society, incapable of living normally, let alone fight for their rights. This is a genocide of the living. Now, with this review of 11 kinds of wars, I could say the following. Nothing like this array of wars exists in colonial history. Of course, there are colonial cases of more savagery, more people killed or driven away, more territory seized, but never before there was such a wide-ranging scale of different wars, pre-planned and executed by well-organized troops and groups, conducted not from one metropole, but from many Western countries, where centers of power there aided and abetted these wars. All this was not in the age of bow and arrow, but the age of planes, telephones, and TV, not in the age of pirate ships and free-scale savagery, but in the age of the United Nations and Reuters agency, not in a remote, unknown, uncharted continent, but in a venerated ancient country, the cradle of Christianity, to which many of these Western countries belong. Will this venture succeed? It did in part. Will it continue? Let us observe some facts. The people in Palestine at the time of the infamous Balfour Declaration were only 700,000. At the year of Nakba in 1948, they were 1.7 million. Now, they are 13 million. In the year 2030, they will be 18 million. Half of them are still on Palestinian soil, but they are living under occupation and apartheid rule. 85% of the other half are in the borders of Palestine, within walking distance of their homes. And the remainder is scattered in no less than 100 cities around the world. So we can conclude the Palestinian people are here to stay and they will not go away. But can they return home? Could this unique tragedy end? Well, we know the international law is solidly behind them. Resolution 194, calling for the return of the refugees, has been affirmed 135 times, more and longer than any resolution in UN history. We realize that international law is no more than an expression of good conscience, but it can be, and it is actually, a tool of the powerful to strike the weak. Nevertheless, it is the conscience of the masses. When they speak, they have a powerful voice. So here we have it. Against international law, Zionism built a solid wall of several layers. First, occupation. There is not a single kilometer in Israel acquired at any time by legal means, not one. All obtained by collusion, but mostly by brute force. Second layer of this wall is apartheid. Now, there is no need for Israelis to pretend otherwise. Israel proclaimed the nation-state law in July 2018. B'Tselem report of December 2020 confirmed apartheid in all of Palestine, whether occupied in 1948 or 1967. But before both of them, the United Nations ESQA report in March 2017 published its report about apartheid Israel. It got buried in the United Nations. The third layer of the wall is racism. There are at least 55 laws applied against Israeli Palestinian citizens today. The fourth layer is war crimes. Many treaty-based conventions have condemned Israel war crimes. Now it is all before ICC. I hope it works. Now this solid wall, the edifice of occupation, apartheid, racism, and war crimes, can this wall be breached? It must be. There can be no peace without it. But here are some hopeful signs. The past 100 years, within a memory of many people today, witnessed 2 major world wars, many regional wars, and the demise of abolition of racism, apartheid, fascism, Nazism, formal communism, the end of colonies in Asia and Africa. They have all vanished, except in Israel. And we, Palestinians, moved from a vague appellation as Arab refugees by Europe. We were called Arab refugees, not related to a country, to our recognition by securing a seat at the United Nations, recognized by 130 member states. To add to this hopeful sign, our young people did not forget, even today, and will never forget. Many of them are in imposed exile in dozens of cities in Europe and USA, in, strangely enough, a modern diaspora of Palestinians. They are professors, lawyers, scientists, even at NASA, media experts, yes, including at CNN, economists, bankers. Some are very extremely successful. They all have the components of a successful Palestine, old country reborn, except they are still refugees, denied their right to return home. But now we have a weapon of truth, which should be liberating the occupied minds in the West from a long history of misinformation, falsehoods, and deception. This effective weapon does not need tanks, does not need airplanes, does not need millions of lobby dollars. The soldiers in this new world war is the intellectual. That is, the person who knows the truth. It's you and me and millions of other people. It's you in this institution at SOAS. It's us in PLSC. This is a war to liberate the minds of the uninformed, the cheated, the deceived, and the silenced. The person of knowledge, the intellectual, should he take up his duty or shrink from it? I leave the answer to Edward Said. He answered this point, and I quote, "Nothing in my view is more reprehensible than those habits of mind in the intellectual that induce avoidance, that characteristic turning away from a difficult and principled position, which you know to be the right one, but which you decide not to take. You do not want to appear too political. You are afraid of seeming controversial. You want to keep a reputation for being balanced." End of quote. I guess, and I hope, there are many who will not shrink from their duty. They know that the power of knowledge is supreme, lasting, liberating. So let me call upon those who know to speak up. Let the innocent and the pure cry out, "The emperor has no clothes." Let a map of occupation silence a lying politician. Let facts about brutality save a child from being shot on his way to school. Let an image of brutal soldiers save a woman on her way to hospital from dying at checkpoint. I realize that the task is great, but I believe it's doable. That's where you, we, all of us in institutions of learning come in. I have faith, unshakable faith, that the march of justice will reach its destination. In spite of all this overwhelming power against defenseless Palestinian people, it has not succeeded over 7 decades to break their will or to demolish their spirit. Their dispersion in the world carried with each one a candle, shining truth in the darkness about their fate. Yes, I agree, candlelight is small, and the power of darkness is much greater. But let there be many candles everywhere, held by every person of conscience. We will win. No power can suppress the struggle of the human spirit for freedom. So let us all work together so that Palestinian people be free. Thank you.